order from. So I emailed my representative, and that's what he brought down. So I went, the other one is from behind my desk, so I went and got it out.
We had a vendor come in and bring us they're in
Hi. You ready?
They don't let you pick. Is it gonna like give you feedback right now?
this morning. Try to make it you know what I mean? Talked on the phone.
attention here? No? No? We have a few announcements before we start. Get everyone's attention here. First of all, for those of you who are really excited about the topic of networking and want to join our book club, the W.I.N book club is reading this lovely book, Make Your Contacts Count on Networking. So if you want to join the book club and read this book with us and discuss it later, email one of us up here and we will let you know when the book club is meeting.
Okay, a couple other things. So we have a Lean In Circle leadership meeting tomorrow. And then we'll have our mid-year check-in in 2 weeks on the 28th. So we'll be notifying everyone shortly about the time for that date. And then I'll hand it over to Nicole.
Okay. We also in March are looking forward to scheduling a larger networking session for all of you that participated last time. We were at Fleming's and it was a great turnout and we had a great time connecting with each other and building networks. This upcoming event, we're going to partner with Ernst Young's women's group and try and get all together and do a larger networking event so we can continue to build our network within Bloom & Brands and outside as well.
And I wanted to remind you all that if you're still interested in joining our mentoring program, we have extended the date, so you have until end of day Friday to send me your request to join that program. If you don't have the information, my name is W.I.N. Just shoot me a quick email and I can send it back to you. And I think now it's Kelly.
Back to Kelly. Back to Kelly.
We're going to hand it over to Liz right now.
Thank you, guys. I am actually really excited to see this full room and to see the some men have attended as well. And I want to just give a shout out to everybody for obviously taking the time to come in here, Mindy, who we are really honored to have with us. I think it's most appropriate to start by saying I met Mindy through networking, okay? So, moved down here from New York City, didn't know a soul, working mom, crazed, and Steve Sadoff, who was the chairman of Saks Fifth Avenue and had worked with me in another life at Kraft and had worked with Mindy in another life. And he said to me, "You're not alone. One of the sharpest, smartest, funniest women I know happens to be CEO of a Fortune company down in St. Pete, Tampa. And the minute you land, you got to call her." And he did vice versa. So that is absolutely a true story. One of the first people that reached out to me, took me for dinner, and literally from, "Yeah, don't shop there. This is a dry cleaner. Yeah, no, that's wrong. No," was Mindy. And this all went down at Fleming's, and here's the deal. Here, yeah, no, never take this call. Yes, always take her call. You know, I couldn't have survived. Not only is she an incredible business person, I'll talk about that, but she's an even better human being, honestly, and you'll recognize that. And there's very few people who have that head and heart, and what you'll recognize with Mindy, and for those of you who've heard her speak, she's all in on everything. Mindy cares about everything, which is pretty awesome. So our whole friendship and my entry here started because of networking, and then I was fortunate enough to impose on Mindy to join our board of directors. She cares passionately about the growth of this company and the people of this company and is one of our strongest advocates. She wears many hats. There's a constant demand for her time. But yet she's coming here early today, and I'm not going to stay because I'm going to be getting ready for another hat she wears, which is chair of our compensation committee. So we put a lot of demands on Mindy for her time, as does other people, and she always, her first response to everything is to pay it forward and to mentor and to give back. Mindy has 38 years of experience in the retail industry, breaking a number of barriers, a number of firsts, way too many to mention, but the most senior woman ever at Nike and kind of launched women's apparel for all intents and purposes. And then she got a call to come lead HSN, do the turnaround, take it public, did that. You'll see her imprint on so many things that she has done and created out there, from Chaps and Ralph Lauren and Tommy Hilfiger and just a whole bunch of amazing things. She also is passionate, as I said, about mentorship and leadership. And she is also reached out and recruited me to the board of UNICEF, of where she's vice chair. I think just another example of, you know, the amount of caring and mentoring and time that she puts in. The other thing that I was teasing her about, and I'm going through this because this is a woman who has so much demand on her time, but always makes time for women, for leadership, for mentorship, and for helping develop people. But unfortunately for Mindy, it's a great honor, but she took over chairmanship of the National Retail Federation this year. Have any of you heard of border tax, imports, exports, the undoing, the headline saying the undoing of all retail? She was fortunate enough now to rotate in to be chairperson for the next 2 years. So you will see, she will be spending quite a bit of time in Washington. You will also see her taking our cause and retail's cause up very candidly. So I'm going to turn it over to her. There's so much more I could say about her because she really is a 360-degree person, and I continue to learn and she's been a mentor to me and an inspiration to me and one of the most creative people I know. So you're going to really enjoy hearing from her. And if that wasn't enough, one of the other things that she just put on her plate was she's now Mimi to a 1-month-old, 3-week-old Emma. So as you can imagine, the queen of retail and shopping, imagine how tricked out Emma is, okay? Seriously. Without further ado.
Oh my God, that's a lot to live up to. I don't know. Thank you, Liz. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I think as Liz said, I'm very passionate about diversity, and I'm very passionate about leadership, and I'm very passionate about sharing, because I believe that in order for us to have diversity, we have to have a lot of voices, and we have to share a lot. And I always say in any of these things, not everything is going to relate to you, but if you can leave everywhere taking those 1 or 2 things that you think can relate to you and utilize them, then it's valuable time spent.
That's great advice. And again, thank you so much for coming. We are all so excited you were here. And Marcia and I have a list of questions that have been contributed by members of the audience here. And so we'd like to go through a few of them with you. And then maybe if we have time, we can ask some more from the audience.
Great.
So the first one, you've obviously been very successful in your career, starting out of college as an assistant to the president of a menswear company, and quickly moving up the ladder to senior leadership positions at well-known companies like Tommy Hilfiger, Chaps Ralph Lauren, Nike, and now obviously CEO of HSN. How have the connections you have made along the way helped you on that path?
So I would not be anywhere without the relationships and the connections that I've made. And you know, I tell people all the time a couple of different things. Number one, you know, I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I try and surround myself with incredible people. That there's a big difference between networking and true relationships and authentic relationships. And then third, I've really focused my entire career on trying to make other people successful, because if I do that, that's going to make myself as well as the company more successful. And building relationships that are true, that are real, and that what I call are generous, in where you want to do things for people, not expecting anything in return, where there's an incredible element of trust. And throughout my career, I've never taken the traditional path. Most of my choices of where I would go next would be what others would call very high risk. And I would never have been able to be successful in any of them if I didn't have a true, authentic network of, in some cases, friends, and in some cases, business relationships that were willing to take a chance because of our relationship. And I believe to this day, if anyone asks me how I've been able to do what I've been able to do, whether it be in business or managing my life, it's been because of those connections and relationships.
And so, I mean, so as you've changed roles, whether it's different industries or different responsibilities, how has your networking evolved as you've changed your jobs?
So if you sit back and go, what really is networking, right? It's putting yourself in environments or connecting with people to create relationships where you can provide and you can get something, and you can start having that circle be bigger. The number one thing that I look for in people, and you find that people who have networks, is an incredible sense of curiosity. Because if you are really curious, right, you're probably interesting yourself, because you're putting yourself in places where you're constantly learning and constantly iterating. And I even talk about it when we hire people, because everybody was very big on the 3 C's, content, community, commerce. So I finally came up as when we hire, we're looking for 3 C's. Cool, curious, and connected. And by cool, I don't mean what you wear. I meant you're interesting. I want to be with you. Like, I'm learning something from you. I want to have dinner with you. I want to hear more from you. Because if you're that way, it probably means you're interested, which means you're curious, which means you probably surround yourself with people like yourself. Because for every one person that you have, if they have that connectivity, you've now expanded your asset within that individual. So when you think of creating these networks, the number one thing you have to have is curiosity. And I find too many people, when they think of networking, they think of it just as showing up. It really takes work. Because if you just show up without doing work, I guarantee you that you're probably only going to talk to people you know. But if you deliberately say, what am I curious about? What do I want to learn? Who are the type of people I want to meet? What is my purpose for networking? And sometimes it could just be I'm interested in something. Then you seek out what are those opportunities, where should they be, and once you decide that, who else is going to be there? And then do homework in advance and say, okay, if I'm going to go to this event, there's 3 people I am going to target to meet because I just think they're interesting. I think I can, provide something to them, or I think I can learn something from them. So it's almost, in a way, a combination of curiosity and being, tactical about why you want to do something. And I was telling them the story earlier. When I was at Nike, I started their Women's Leadership Council. And what happened was the company was having an issue with what they called regrettable losses. Women were leaving their workforce. And one of the things that came out in the research that I did, and I felt being the most senior woman there, I had a responsibility, that isolationism is a big challenge. So we had women in Japan and women in Brazil and women, but if you're the only one and you don't have a connection, so we formed the first Women's Leadership Council, and we brought the 100 senior leaders and women leaders in the company together. And we had a speaker there named Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote a book, Never Eat Lunch Alone. And we all got there, we're sitting at tables, and one of the first things he said was, okay, it's 100 women in this room, many of you meeting each other for the first time, because you're all over the world. How many of you, before the meeting, reached out to any of the other women to get time with them alone, or to introduce themselves? And maybe 2 hands went up. And it was a big aha to all of us that we now had this incredible opportunity that we weren't taking advantage of. And his book, Never Eat Lunch Alone, is no matter where you're going, maybe you're on a business trip, or maybe you're somewhere else, there's no harm in reaching out. Because what's the worst thing that can happen? Someone's going to be busy, or they're not going to be there. And so that's always kind of been my philosophy. If I'm traveling, or if I'm curious about something, or I read a book, I'm really comfortable, today, making myself uncomfortable and saying, what's the worst thing that can happen if somebody doesn't want to? And I think a big part, and I think women much more so than men, they don't like the idea of being rejected. They're like, well, what if they don't want it? Who cares, right? Because you're just as interesting as that other person. They just don't know you yet. If you think about it.
So you mentioned the use of technology. As we're using more and more technology, I think we are constantly looking at our phones, not looking up. But you mentioned a few ways of how we could leverage technology for networking. Do you think then the use of technology really has changed and helped networking, or there are maybe a few ways that we could leverage technology to network better?
I think it's been a huge asset because no matter what you do, you have information at your fingertips. I said before, I was invited to the Microsoft CEO conference for the first time. And, I was on a panel and it was a little intimidating. It was the first time I'm like, okay, I'm probably the smallest cap company at the entire, conference. But I'm like, who's going to be at the conference? And so I had all the technology at my fingertips, who was going to be there, what were their backgrounds, when were they going to be there, what. And I intentionally reached out to a number of people, and it is a conference. There's no social media allowed at that conference. There's no handlers, right? It's the C or no. And I said, this is an opportunity. Where else am I going to have this opportunity? And in some cases, I was like, okay. It ended up being a phenomenal opportunity, not just for some of the one-on-ones, but going into the breakouts and being in an environment. But it wouldn't have been an opportunity if I just sat next to the Bob Dukowski from Tech Data the whole time, right? Who's a great guy, but I already knew him. So I'm a big believer in doing the research because you do have the capabilities. To your other point, though, I think if you do put yourself in these situations, sitting there on doing your emails the whole time isn't going to make you seem very interesting to people. So you've got to really be comfortable in making the effort to be someone that people want to be interested in.
So you mentioned reaching out to people that you thought were interesting. Who have been some of the people that have been your most influential contacts or ones that have helped you the most in your career?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. So when I took over HSN a little over 10 years ago, I was the 8th CEO in 10 years. So you can imagine what happens in a company like that. It kind of stalls. I knew I had to transform the company, and I had 3 things I had to do that. Number one, I had to really focus on the culture and make people believe that I wasn't going to be next to the 9th CEO who was going to come in, and I was really staying. So I had to recharge the culture. But then I had to convince the market that we were going to be this new network because we didn't have any brands or personalities or celebrities or any of those things. So I had to reach out to my network, and I had to really, and that's when I learned that those relationships meant everything. Because when you do have the relationship and people trust you, they'll take a risk with you because they believe you'll stand behind what you say. And I remember that the fashion industry, for example, were like, I'm not going there. And I called my friend Stephanie Greenfield, who started that chain of stores called Scoop. And I said, Steph. And she was one of the first people to really understand what I was doing, because most people thought I was having a midlife crisis when I left Nike to do this. And that's another thing. Don't ever let anyone diminish you, because I all of a sudden I was the cool kid and now I wasn't so cool, and I said, they just don't know it yet, right? And I said, Steph, I've got to do this. She goes, okay, we're going to do Scoop style shows. And she convinced Theory and Vince and Stuart Weitzman and J. Crew to be on the runway and do those shows with me. So it was my having the relationship, then her having the relationship. And that's how I toppled getting the fashion industry to believe in our transformation. I was able to do a 2-year deal with Sephora, and 30 beauty brands were launched. Was able to bring on additional chefs. So if you think about it, I was able to tap into 4 people to give me 400, or whatever that is. And so there's amplification power in those real relationships, and it goes back to connections. Now, it was up to me to live up to everything that I said we were going to do and how we were going to treat the brand and how we were going to grow the business. But those relationships were of critical importance because I could never have achieved the consumer goal if I couldn't transform the business. So the second example was about 4 years in, we said we really need another big point of differentiation. And Bill Brandt, who's now the president of HSN, and I, we brainstormed and we said, you know what, we need to be known for entertainment. We need to partner with the film studios, the TV studios, because we're an entertainment platform and we're a storytelling platform. So I said, but how are we going to do this? We need someone. So we partnered. I reached out to a gentleman at William Morris Endeavor and said, how am I going to do this? And he goes, I'm going to connect you with our new strategy arm that we have that's working with corporate businesses. And so we worked for a year, and they were able to introduce me and get me meetings, the head of every major film studio, television studio, gaming company, music company, and we now have a 6-year relationship with Disney, Universal. You can call anyone. But again, it was reaching out to someone to say, here's a problem I'm trying to solve. Now, here's the converse of all of this. And I was telling you, we were talking earlier. There's a book that everyone in this room, I'm telling you, should be required reading. It's called Give and Take by Adam Grant. And the theory is that there are 3 sorts of people in business or in life: givers, takers, and matchers. Okay? Takers, we know who they are. It's all about give me, give me, give me, and I want to get ahead in business, and if I get what I want, I'm going to get ahead. And we know a lot of those people, and a lot of them are successful. Then there are the givers. And they're giving not because they have to give, they're giving because it's intuitive to them. And then the matchers are kind of in between. And his theory is that ultimately, givers with a purpose are going to be most successful. So my philosophy has always been, even before I read the book, if I can do something for someone because it's going to help them, it doesn't matter if it's going to help me. If I meet someone and I go, you know what, you should meet these 2 people because I think you'd find them really interesting. Or I'm somewhere and I see something that's going to be interesting to you, or I've read something, I'm going to send it to you. You don't even have to acknowledge, I'm just going to do it. Or it's a gift. I'll give you an example. So Terry Lundgren, who I know very well from Macy's, I was on One Kings Lane and they had a pair of vintage skis that were actually at one point Macy's branded. And I just bought him the skis, and he loves those skis every time he sees them in the office. There was no benefit to me. But because I've always done that, and I actually now get great joy around doing that and finding things, when I do have to literally ask a favor or call and go, would you do something? People are going to go, well, why wouldn't I? And the thing in Adam Grant's book, what he said, and what I believe in, if somebody asks me something and it's going to take 5 minutes, or it's going to be connect me, why wouldn't I do it? And I think that's really important in terms of building relationships. It's this idea, we talk about it, one of our fundamental values at HSNI is building a culture of generosity. And what are we doing for the customer without asking her to always buy something? What are we doing for our partners? What are we doing for each other? And that becomes a ripple effect. It really does.
So let's move to maybe a little bit different area. So you've talked about before and now about all the great companies and people and celebrities you've met, but
I've had some bad ones too.
So and here lies the question. So tell us about your strangest or funniest or maybe worst experience.
I'll tell you about my worst experience, which actually ended up being my best experience. So I started out in the menswear industry in sales and merchandising, and I was fortunate to move quickly as a young woman. And I had the opportunity to work for Tommy Hilfiger, who I'm still very, very close with, he and his wife. It was the hottest company in men's, hotter than, it was just taking off. I had my daughter when I was working there, and I'd been there a few years, and this headhunter kept calling me to go to work for a company called Warnaco. And I'm like, I'm not leaving this company now, it's on fire. And so they were relentless. And finally it was like, really, they want you to go there and be the president of Chaps Ralph Lauren. And I go, why would I be the president of Chaps Ralph Lauren? It's, it's a very small business. And so finally they called and said, would you just go meet with Ralph and his partner at the time, Peter Strong? I said, okay, why wouldn't I go meet with her? So I did, and he's a very convincing gentleman. And he was like, no, we really believe that this Chaps Ralph Lauren business could be a very big business. It's not being managed well. There's a lot of stores that don't carry polo, that Chaps could be their polo. And there's a lot of stores where there is polo that Chaps could be, okay. But the company was a license with a company called Warnaco, which was run by a woman named Linda Wachman, and who had a terrible reputation. So, by the way, when Fortune used to do the toughest bosses in America, she was on the cover of one of them. Okay. But I weighed everything, and I was like, okay, I really think I could make this business unbelievable. If I stay at Tommy, it's going to be great, and I love him, but this company is growing so fast, I'm not going to become the president of the company. They're going to get somebody in who's run $1 billion business, and if anything, my job will actually get a little bit more narrow. I mean, I'll still be successful, but it'll be more narrow. Very few opportunities for a woman to be a president of a menswear company. It was 20 times worse then. And you know what? I think, and I'm working for Ralph Lauren, so I have that pedigree, which was still amazing. So I make the decision. People thought I was insane. It was a $26 million company, not making a lot of money. The company, and Warnaco was about to go public. But I did it. And in 3 years, we went from 25 million to 300 million, making a lot of money, and I was doing well, and you think, oh, hunky-dory, right? The way the company was being run and led was by fear. It was a toxic environment, and even though I was being treated well because I was performing, I could not sit there and condone how other people were being treated or how the company was being run. And I realized after being there for 3 years that if I stayed even one more day, I was complicit in that behavior and environment. Because when you have an environment that's governed by fear versus positive culture, you lose your best talent, right? You have to overpay people to keep them, but you don't get the best people. And you're not going to have long-term business success, no matter what you can do in the short term. My contract was up. I hadn't signed anything new, and I came home one night, and I said to my husband, I'm resigning tomorrow. I don't have another job, and I had to work. It wasn't like, I said, but I can't do this. It is against my values, and my values are more important than what I get paid or what I do. And I had about a 3-year-old at the time, and I said, but trust me, we're going to be okay. I went in the next morning and I resigned, and I remember she said to me, are you resigning after 15 minutes? I go, yes. I said, it's just better for me personally and professionally to leave the company. And she finally said to me, well, you're either independently wealthy, or you have another job, or you're stupid. I said, or D, none of the above. And I was escorted out by security. Standing on Park Avenue between 38th and 39th going, what did I just do? But I knew I did the right thing, and I went home. And I just said, okay, there'll be another, chapter. And the next day, Ralph called me, said, I'm really sorry you left, but if you're going to go anywhere, I want you to come here. And that's when I went into corporate, and a year later, I started Polo Jeans. So the values of a company and and I tell this to young people all the time, when you make a decision of where you're going to go, it doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest, but you find something with momentum and you find something that aligns with your values. Because if you don't, it doesn't matter how successful you are. But that was, to me, a really defining moment, and it made me realize that not having done that was a bigger risk for me, my life, and my career than doing it.
And you've talked to us some about successful networking, so things that have turned out well for you. What are some of the mistakes you see people make when they're networking?
I think a couple of things. I think being very obvious that you just want something from someone. Nobody wants that. Or coming up to someone and immediately talking about yourself. Human nature, what I have found is everybody wants to be asked about themselves. And I think the best start of a connection is, let's say you've done your homework and you go to someone, find a piece of commonality. Like, I'll look and see that somebody grew up somewhere, or went to a school, or worked for a company, or had a friend, or wrote an article, whatever it is. People like to know that you know something about them, not creepy, right? But that you've taken the time to know something, and that's how you start the conversation about them. And you act curious, and you ask the questions, and I've just seen it where people go up and immediately they go into like reciting their resume or something, and you kind of recoil from that, right? It's just about starting dialogue, and most dialogue is effective when it starts from some form of common interest. The second thing I see is that people may want to go over to someone, but if they're with other people, they don't want to. I think if you're in an environment, it's a cocktail party. Now, look, if people are in an intense conversation, it's one thing. But if people are just around, there's nothing wrong with going over and introducing yourself. And the biggest mistake is not doing that. Because again, what's the worst thing that can happen? Either they're not that interesting and you don't want to hang out, or they're not engaging, and so go do something else. But I would say, those are a couple of things that are definitive.
Do you also network only within your industry, or do you find it helpful to network outside the industry?
I actually find it helpful to absolutely do both. Because if you only stay in your lane, you don't learn as much. Because in today's world, everything affects everyone else. So to give you an example, when I started at HSN, most of my background was either in fashion or with Nike and sport and marketing, etc. Well, I had never had experience in the electronics business, fitness, beauty, home, any of these other areas. But what I found over the course of the last years, my first consumer electronics show that I went to, I wasn't just learning about the consumer electronics business, I was also learning about technology that was affecting everything else in consumer behavior. And in the 10 years since I've been going there, it's morphed from consumer electronics to connected home, connected health, technology. I joined the board of Cosmetic Executive Woman because I didn't know everybody in the beauty business. And so I said, the only way I'm going to meet all these people, because I have to attract all these brands, is to put myself out there. So I made an effort to join that board for that purpose. What I now tell anyone in my organization, if you're running beauty, I don't want you only going into, beauty events. Everyone has to, let's say they go to X amount of events a year. So we do a couple of things. If we're going to support and pay, right, for people to go to all these events, when people come back, everyone does a write-up and a presentation of what they learned and how it can benefit other people. And you'd be amazed how many companies don't do that, because number one, if you go somewhere, and it's a one page, you don't have to write a lot. But here's what I found that was interesting, because not everybody can go. So it's almost like getting a weekly sheet of what's been happening in different businesses. So that's been very valuable, and when we share out. But it also makes you think differently. So, every year I rotate the things that I go to, and sometimes it'll be the Consumer Electronics Show or a jewelry show or a Microsoft Summit or a Fortune Women's Summit. But what is going to just give me, and what am I going to learn? I love learning. So whether it's going to, a different event and you don't know what the networking is going to be. So if you look in the retail industry right now, people running retail companies didn't all come out of retail. There's a lot of people now coming out of CPG. There's a lot of people coming out of technology. So if you meet people across a very broad swath of industries, as the world converges, you're now just going to know more people in different places. So if I have a problem, or if I have a curiosity, or if somebody asks me something, the number of people that I now know across so many different things that I could pick up the phone and go, I'm thinking about this, was this a good conference, etc., has been multiplied by that many, because we don't just live in one industry. So think about your business here. And just in the time I've been on the board, so yes, you may be in the restaurant business, but how dramatically are you being impacted by technology? How much are you being impacted by on-demand? How much are you being impacted by experience and environment? And that can come from how much are you being impacted by globalization. So curiosity of all of these different things is only going to give you ideas to do things differently. And I always say, everybody says, what are some of the things you have that's helped you be successful? And I always use the expression, if anybody's seen the movie Working Girl, and at one point they go, well, how did you think of this? And she goes, well, Trask radio. So putting two different things together that you never would have thought could go together. And the only way you can think about that is if you've experienced them. So putting yourself out there to think of how these different things come together, I think is really interesting.
So as we're learning about networking from Mindy, I thought maybe we would open the questions up to the floor. So who would like to start? Don't worry, Kelly and I have enough questions, but we thought in case, there was something that Mindy mentioned.
Hi, you were talking about the different boards that you were on, and it sounded like quite a few. At what point in your career, or any of our careers, do you feel like, starting to get into boards, whether it's for nonprofits or other companies, at what point do you feel like it's a good decision to start getting into?
So my answer is as soon as you can, because that's part of networking as well, and contributing. And so my theory on that is, if you think about things that are interesting to you, and also think about where you are in your career and what impact you can have. And I'm a believer that no matter what point in your career you are, you have the capacity for impact. And that goes back to how can you continue to help create success? Not necessarily for yourself, but how could you have impact on what you can do? So I'm a big believer that within a company, whenever there is an opportunity for you to volunteer, to work on a high-profile project, to be on a committee, to be involved, take it, because it's going to give you more exposure, and it's going to give you more capacity and understanding of how the entire company works. As it relates to boards, what's great about starting as early as you can, even if it's a small nonprofit, you will learn board interaction, you will meet other people, you will understand other aspects of business, because anything with a board is a business, whether it's philanthropic or not. So, for example, for myself, I was on the board of a school in Harlem, in New York, when I was fairly young, and someone that had gone to law school with my husband. They knew I was very passionate about diversity and education. The school was just starting up. I think I was, maybe I was at CHAPS or somewhere at the time. And you know, I got on that board. I was very passionate about it, and it did two things. It fulfilled me in something that was really important. It engaged me. It made me understand the complexities of education and inner city, and I was able to meet a really diverse and dynamic group of people who I've still stayed in touch with. And although I didn't have a lot to be able to contribute financially, I had some, and I realized that in my own way, I could have impact around something that was, you know, bigger than myself. A second example is I was, you know, I became I was accepted into YPO when I was very young, and I remember going, I'm not good enough to be in YPO. I'm not an entrepreneur. I didn't start. And someone said to me, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? You won't be accepted. And it was actually kind of an epiphany for me because I was pretty naive, and actually I knew that I was horrible in my interview. I mean, I knew it. I like froze. I was nervous. I probably didn't do as much, you know, kind of homework. I didn't role play, and somehow they let me in, you know, anyway. But it's kind of putting yourself in a situation where, you know, you might not be uncomfortable, but I was able to meet a lot of people. And so today, I talk about a lot. I'm at a very different point in my life, but impact means more to me than it's ever mattered before, because I've been fortunate enough to have a platform, not just financially to be able to contribute, but a platform to have a voice, and to be able to create change and to be able to do things. And if I have that, shame on me if I'm wasting it. And you know, the work at UNICEF to me is incredibly fulfilling. And I'm an all-in person, so if I commit, it's a big commitment. You know, I'm chairman of the National Retail Federation. Joe knows a lot. He's chairman of the Restaurant Association, so knows. But you know, joining NRF, I had never been a retailer before I joined HSN. I was on the brand side. So in one fell swoop, I was able to meet the leaders in the entire industry. So whether it's boards, whether it's philanthropic, whether it's trade associations, whether it's, and they shouldn't just be women's groups. Because the reality is, and I think it's amazing what you guys have built there, and that Liz and you support that, because coming together is really important. But as I like to say, and I think what Cheryl did with Lean In, bravo, but we could be leaning in the rest of our lives, and if men do not support the efforts around diversity, we're just going to keep leaning in. So I think it's really important that you lend your voice more broadly. And you know, to me in particular, around this issue of diversity, I'm very vocal. And when I have a platform, I'm very vocal with the platform, because I believe that, and I'm not just talking about gender diversity, I'm talking about gender, ethnicity, diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of talents, is what creates a really successful company. And the more we can bring experiences and other places to the table, the more valuable it is.
Other questions?
Do you sleep?
I'm going to tell you something funny. We're just talking about that. I have to get better, and I'm trying, because there's a couple of issues. I've gotten to know Ariana Huffington very well, and if you've read her book, Thrive, she's obsessed with sleep now, because she had an incident where she wasn't taking care of herself, and it, you know, she could have really damaged herself, and it was an epiphany, and she feels that sleep is one of, you know, the most important things you could do for self-regeneration. My problem is that I have a hard time shutting off. That's my biggest problem. And you know, you want to be there for your business, and you want to be there for your family. And I'm really curious, so I'll research something until, you know, I can't research it anymore. So I haven't found the answer, but it's on my to-do list. I know, I was saying if anyone is about to have a baby, and hopefully they'll get more affordable. I met this doctor. Actually, it was amazing because at CES this year for the first time, they had a whole area that was just mother-baby. And with my daughter being about to have a baby, Ariana introduced me to this Dr. Harvey Karp, who's this renowned pediatrician who developed this, let's call it, responsive bassinet called a SNU. And they had done all the research that not only is it good for the baby, but the #1 cause of postpartum depression in women is lack of sleep. So if you could find something to get the baby to sleep better and the mom to sleep better, so they just launched it. So I got one for my daughter, who at first said, "Mom, it looks like I'm putting my kid in an insane asylum because you've got to like swaddle him." By the morning, she had texted me, "The SNU is a godsend." So hopefully their plan is to kind of, just like any consumer electronics, make it more affordable, but he had done all these sleep studies.
More questions? Okay, well, let's take one from our list then.
Actually, another that's not on our list. You were the co-chair of the Nike Women's Leadership Group. How would you recommend we utilize our group to help the women here the most?
So I would say a couple of things. So we had 2 purposes. One was truly bringing women together to network, to share, to build relationships that they could leverage. The second was mentorship. How could we create mentorship opportunities? The third was what you're doing today. We started a speaker series that we would bring both women from within the company as well as from without the company, and we would broadcast, but very diverse women. Because as I said, when we first started, let's say you go to 10 of these, and you may go, I don't really relate to that person, but you know what, I took 2 things away, or 1 thing, and this is who I am, and this is what, because no one person is going to be the same. So that was a very big part of what it was. The second part of what it was to really promote diversity within the company and to be able to use our individual voices to help do that if we thought we could have impact. So a couple of things we did. Now again, every company is different. They had a scenario where we actually brought in Catalyst to do an inclusion survey because we had an extreme situation. And we created diversity within succession planning was part of a manager's goals because we wanted to create more of a diverse company. And in order to hire someone, 50% of your candidate pool had to be diverse. Now that was specific to the company. But I would definitely say the greatest impact was the relationships and women having more confidence by using the networks they had and feeling more confident to speak up when they felt it was appropriate. And I was telling them a funny story. So I got to Nike, and I go to this, and I was invited to this big global basketball meeting. 60 people, big global basketball meeting. So you can imagine who's in that room, right? Everybody, the Jordan team, the Nike team, whatever. I'm in the room, and I'm the only woman in the room, okay? And they were all talking, and all of a sudden, I said something, and they all stared at me like, oh my God, the woman is saying something. What is she gonna say? And I cracked up, and I looked at these guys, and I said, let me explain something to you. I'm a 40-year-old white Jewish woman from New York out of the fashion industry. If you really want some opinions on global basketball, you may want a few more like me who have different experiences. But it was that moment where I felt confident enough to put that out there in a very unthreatening way and say, yes, I do have something to contribute, but it's going to be very specific to my background and my knowledge. And if you do want a women's perspective who buys a lot of fan apparel and who does play basketball in the WNBA, you may want a few more people at the table. So I think there are ways that having that connection made people more comfortable. And there's a woman named Sarah Robb O'Hagan who's just launching her first book. And she just became the CEO of Flywheel, and she'd come from Equinox. And her book is a little bit about being somewhat audacious and about taking risks and being comfortable with things like that.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so any questions now that...
I actually have something to read. Hearing you say, that what could happen as far as, what's the worst thing that can happen. Hearing you say what's the worst thing that can happen is so refreshing, because I think that fear holds a lot of us back from doing things that we wouldn't we should maybe do. Maybe take another job, maybe move to a different position, go up and speak to an executive or someone we want to network. So it's great to hear what's the worst thing that can happen, because in the back of our mind, I think it is fear that holds us back from moving on to other things, moving on to different companies, or even approaching somebody we want to talk to.
Yeah. So thanks. So there's two things that go with that. One is, and I do think women more than men, I always say, why is anyone going to believe in you if you don't believe in yourself? And I think the most transformational power we have comes down to two things: self-belief and self-awareness. What is your impact on other people, and are you truly self-aware? Which is why I really believe in coaching. I had an executive coach. I know Liz did and thinks very highly of that experience. And be open to ask for feedback about, so I think self-awareness, self-belief. But then the third thing, know the difference between risk and suicide, right? And you're going to take different risks at different points in your career based on your capacity for that risk. Whether it's your capacity financially, whether it's your capacity with your family, whether it's your capacity for learning, or whatever else. But it really starts with, who am I? What do I have that's valuable to something else? What's my value, and how do I create greater value? And then, have I really thought about that risk? And I'm a big believer in lists. So what looked like crazy to other people when I left this Nike land to go take over this company was very strategic. I had a list on a piece of paper that said, if I were to leave Nike, and I could have stayed there forever, but they had just made Mark Parker CEO and Charlie Denson president. They were both in their early 50s and in very good health. So succession wasn't looking so good, okay? But I said, what would I do? And I wrote down on a piece of paper, I wanted direct-to-consumer business. I'd had the opportunity to travel around the world seeing the growth of mobile before it was here, that technology was going to change people's behavior, how consumers were going to interact with goods and media were changing. I wanted something transformational. I was 48 and I could take a risk to do something very different, but I wanted it to have scale. And I literally had a list. So when I was approached by people, I put it through that filter. And when I put this through the filter, as crazy it may have seemed, it checked the box. And I was like, I'm willing to take that risk because it is what I want right now. So I think that is also, really know what it is that's important to you at a different phase in your career, which was different when I left Polo Jeans to go to Nike. I knew that I needed a place that was going to give me an MBA in marketing. I wanted a global organization. And hey, who wouldn't want to work for Phil Knight? I mean, that'd be crazy. But I turned the job down because for many reasons, I couldn't move my family to Portland. And I cried as I was turning the job down. And to give you an example of how great the man is, he called me back and said, look, clearly you struggled with this decision, but we struggled with not having you in the company. So if you're willing to make it work, we will make it work. And they let me join the company, and I'm thinking for maybe 2 years I'd do this crazy commute between New York and Oregon and out of the country, and called a meeting with the nanny, my husband and my daughter, and they said, we'll try it for a couple of years. And somehow 6 years went by, which I don't recommend, it was insane. But, it was, when I knew it was the right thing, and they did that. So I think going to a company where you know you're going to get the support goes back to the culture, and if you're going to take a risk, do it in the right place.
I think we are out of time, but I know we have learned an awful lot from you today, Mindy. So we
Thank you
definitely
for
wanna
inviting
thank
me, and
everybody.
you work for a fantastic organization. Thank you.
We have a little something for you, Mindy.
Is it a bloomin' onion, I hope? Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mindy.
Thank you guys, you were great.
Oh, how fabulous. I love these friends. Thanks, darling. Yes, grandma.
You know how to?
Nope. But I never realized that was fantastic. Yes.
Let's try. He's actually going to turn that off remotely. Okay. And then those are powered off.
So nice to meet you. Wanted to come and say hello. It's nice to see you.
How are you doing?
Yes. I would like to find them. They were supposed to find them.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for inviting me.
I've heard a lot of
Thank you so much.